Good evening, and welcome to another episode of The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Perry.
And I'm your host, David. Tonight we're talking about Season 5, Episode 3, Looking for Parmach in All the Wrong Places. Before we continue, you can find us on Facebook, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and X as The Fire Caves, a Star Trek Deep Space Nine podcast.
That is correct. And as I say every single week, you should find us and follow us because we are great. We are awesome. We are a good time. And I must say this week, we are sorry. Sorry because there will be a slight delay in the episodes being released. There were some unfortunate circumstances that came up that caused a delay in editing just slightly. So if you're used to listening to our show via a podcast, not tuning into the live stuff on YouTube, but listening to the podcast, you will find that the episode will come out on Monday, and then our next episode will be out on the following Friday. So that's the only delay that there will be. But yeah, I was just unable to get certain things done due to the nature of the week. So yes, it'll be there. But I apologize if you tried to listen to something maybe on your long car trip or whatever, and we weren't there. But we'll again, but in this case, just think that in the next week you'll actually have two episodes you can listen to on Friday if you want to wait until Friday, so you get 2 hours instead that you'll get.
Right,
So
right.
you know that's how I would do it anyway. But that's just me. But we're not here to talk about all that. We're here to talk about us and Star Trek Deep Space Nine and this great episode. And this episode actually reminded me of something that I said earlier in our broadcasting about, I think it was actually a couple weeks ago, where I said I wasn't sure where my love of Jadzia comes from because I do love the character so much, but we've seen so little of her.
Yeah.
This episode is it. This episode is like the main component, and I figured out why in doing my own rewatch and prep for this episode. So we'll talk
Okay.
about that later
Great.
on. But before we get to all of that, David, how has your week been?
It's been good. It's been good. Last week I mentioned I was going to start reading Red Rising, which is by Pierce Brown. Dude, I'm really enjoying this book. This is a really good book. My roommate is the one who suggested I read it because he really enjoyed it. The way I'm going to describe it is it's like Ender's Game, Harry Potter, and the Hunger Games all had a baby, and that's what this is. You
Hmm.
got and a futuristic sci-fi setting like Ender's Game, where they're doing battles in houses like in Harry Potter, but it's got to the death element. Um, at least right now, I'm halfway through the book, and it's really good. Enjoying it so far. Won't say much more than that. But if you need something to read, anyone out there needs some good fiction, I'm enjoying the first book. The sixth one apparently just released, which is why my roommate was wanting to reread them and suggested I read them. And so I was like, I'll do that. I'm reading The Expanse with Perry. I'll read Red Rising with my roommate. And so, yeah, that's been really good. Other than that, been kind of uneventful. So, yeah, not much else going on.
Well, my week has been quite busy, and we had some unfortunate family tragedies that came through for us, and got made our way through that. Got taken care of. It did leave me a bit, kind of out of sorts and exhausted on some things, but I feel like already kind of moving through that and getting back on track. So that's the most important thing. Other than that, yes, unfortunately, I have not read any of the Expanse this week for obvious reasons, but I will be doubling back down and getting that going once again. Book's actually right over there. I keep it either on my nightstand or next to the door, so that in the event I have to go anywhere and I know I'm going to be going somewhere, I have to like wait around or anything like that, I can make sure to take it and have it with me. So again, our plans for that are going to be basically breaking that up into two After Dark specials. One where we will do the first half of the book and talk about it in relation to the show, and then the next one will be the last half of the book, and again in relation to the show. So if you have been following along with us as we do that, take advantage of the extra time, read, watch the episodes, come back. We're gonna have a great time when we get to that as well. But that is not the focus of tonight's episode. Tonight, we are talking about looking for Parmok in all the wrong places. So
The second longest title in all Star Trek episode names, apparently, from what
there,
Wikipedia has to say.
look at David coming through with the trivia. Normally that's
And I'm gonna give it to you to do the recap on this one because there's a lot going, and I know you're probably ready and raring to go. So
oh, I actually I
would have
am
insisted.
because this I maybe would have insisted, but this is one of those great episodes. Like obviously my favorite characters, Odo, Cisco, Worf. Now that Worf is joined, and this is a very Worf heavy episode, and it also gives us some great Quark and Jadzia elements as well. So
Right.
yes, lots to get into. So this episode, just to give a very, very brief, quick summation, is basically um, Grilka, who we remember from what was that, season two, season three, I think.
Season 3,
Um,
episode 3, apparently. The
yes,
House of Quark.
yes. So in that episode, if you'll remember, Quark accidentally kills Grilka's husband. Grilka comes to the station, essentially kidnaps Quark and demands that they get married so that she can become the leader of her house. They use special dispensation and some clever Ferengi trickery, basically, or to expose her deceased husband's brother and gain her the rights to her house. So
Right.
now she's back, and she has come to the station because the war that had been going on between the Federation and the Klingon Empire, which we now know is in peace negotiations, has been rather costly for her family in particular, and she's needing some financial help. So she's wanting Quark to kind of go over their books and see if he can clear up anything and basically give them a little bit of breathing room while they figure out what's going on. In the process of him doing this, Quark realizes that he's really kind of into Grilka. He's got a thing for her, got a crush, infatuation. Is it love? Isn't it? Who knows? He's got something for her.
Right.
Worf, also seeing Grilka on the station for the first time, becomes just kind of enthralled by this Klingon beauty and believes that she is so glorious, as he calls her. And he makes a play for her. It doesn't go well. Her, what would you call
Advisor.
him? Yeah, her advisor basically is like, yeah, you didn't do anything wrong per se, but basically you're not Klingon enough. It's kind of how that's summed up there. This, of course, incenses Worf, who believes that this is just a terrible thing to say to a person, which, gotta admit, kind of is. Um, he decides that he's going to actually help Quark to woo Grilka, and through his knowledge of his culture, his people, and their regions. Which again, we're going to get into some of that because I think this does a great job of kind of redeeming Worf to a certain degree. But basically, he uses his knowledge to help Quark gain Grilka's favor, much to the dismay of her bodyguard Thopak, who is like, "Nah, this Ferengi and Klingon thing is not happening, not on my watch."
Right.
He
Right.
challenges Quark to a fight to the death, which Quark accepts, but again, using some Federation hijinks and trickery, it's actually going to be Worf using Quark's body to fight Thopak, and they do. They fight. There is a brief moment where things kind of go off the rails a little bit. Quark is clever enough to keep himself alive long enough for them to fix it, and Worf ends up winning the duel for him. Um, they dismiss Thopak, and Grilka and Quark have their moment. All the while all this is going on, we actually start to see these subtle hints that Jadzia is also feeling some type of way for our new resident Klingon. And she's basically kind of challenging Worf in a roundabout way to basically acknowledge that he should be looking for what's right in front of him. And she finally issues him a direct challenge. He accepts. Does she win? Does he win? Do they both win? However
I would
you want to.
imagine. I think in Klingon culture, you both kind of win, which is
Yeah,
why it's so rough.
yeah. And so after some saber rattling and a very nice flip of Jadzia of Worf by Jadzia, those two are now an item on their way to marriage. Our B plot in this story is the Dueling O'Briens, who we see in the very beginning of the episode. Miles and Kira are seemingly having constant arguments now that Kira is living with them again, still carrying the baby, and they're basically trying to figure out a way to work through their relationship. And it seems like, despite any kind of outward arguments or whatever it is, that they have become quite close, quite familiar. And this familiarity has led to maybe some feelings of intimacy. And so they're both kind of like somewhat awkward around each other. And they're both realizing that, again, the familiarity is potentially getting close to crossing a line. And before anything can really come of that, Kira decides to go hightail it off to Bajor and take a break from everybody, just kind of have this isolated moment to herself. To which Keiko promptly objects, forces Miles to go with. And in the last moments, the two of them decide it would be best if they did not go on this very romantic trip alone together, but also acknowledge that, hey, in another life, in another time, maybe, maybe something could have happened. Interesting B story, interesting A story. Both of these stories, I think, are going to be pretty cool to talk about tonight. I have so many things I want to say, especially about that B plot of
Oh
all
yeah.
of that, the living situation.
This
Yeah.
is the episode of the love triangles. We have three
Yes.
love triangles, two of which are intersecting. They're
Yes.
actually like, yeah, but yeah, love
But that's
triangles galore in this episode.
yes. But that is essentially it. That is essentially the episode. It's a very entertaining episode, to say the least. And for one that doesn't really involve any kind of outward plots, no Dominion, no, you know, Cardassian threats looming, and like that. This is very much an in-house episode. And we have some great comedic elements too. Odo popping up and questioning Kira about her role in the family dynamic of the O'Briens. Great scene.
Right.
But that is essentially the episode. So again, go and watch it if you want all the precise details that we're getting ready to discuss. If you want to see them before we spoil it for you. But again, the show is 30 minutes or 30 years old. It shouldn't be a spoiler. And you can watch it and all other treks on Paramount Plus. So just go do that and then come back and join us and tell us if you agree or not. But would you agree that I hit kind of the salient points of our A and B plots here?
You did. Yep. There's more to talk about, but yeah, you hit the most important stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So, as always, since David has never seen this show before, and I've seen it many, many, many times, I'd like to start with you, of course. What was your initial opinions of this episode?
This episode is really awkward, and it. I mean, even Bashir makes clear that we're talking about sex. This episode is about sex. It's about some Kira nudity with the whole O'Brien holding up a towel. Yeah, it's awkward. The Kira O'Brien part in particular is like uncomfortably awkward because we know these characters and it's like we're stepping over boundaries that we thought these characters
Yeah.
had a little bit. Whereas the other plot lines, it's like it's just developing stuff. Quark is willing to put himself in harm's way for a woman, which I don't. The comic doesn't quite fit his character. It feels like he's being a little too risky in this episode. For a woman, he doesn't have a high opinion of women, except he kind of does. We could talk about that.
Yeah. No, I
But
would say that it's in keeping with his character because if we remember again, let's go back season 2 when that Cardassian woman and her students came aboard the station, and he was willing to
right,
risk everything so that she could stay with him. So I think that it's in
right. I'm
keeping with
just,
his character.
but he wasn't like fighting some guy in a duel to the death.
No,
He was still using his deceptive qualities to try and like get her to escape. Like that's what I'm getting at.
yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's. I mean, the best part of the episode is Worf and his ardent infatuation with a Klingon woman, which we haven't seen him have, maybe even ever. I mean, even
Well,
with what's her face?
with
What's
Kalar.
her,
So yes, this would have been
Yes, I
the
always forget
first
her name.
time that Worf would have been pursuing a 100% true blue Klingon woman, and not only that, but
Right,
Grilka is a bit of Klingon aristocracy here. You know, she's the leader
right,
of her own house. It's kind of a noble house. Obviously, they have land, titles, ships, so forth. They are funding the war effort, so they're pretty high up there. You know, she's got her own bodyguard and attendant and all of this stuff. You know, that she is a great house in her own
right,
right. And so here
right,
comes Worf trying to um woo her, pursue her. I mean, yeah, we've never seen him have to do things on Klingon terms. In most cases,
right,
it was always on his terms on the Enterprise or wherever in Federation territory, basically.
right,
So yeah,
right,
this is completely different.
right. Yeah, and it's I'll put it just kind of bluntly. I feel bad for Worf. He's always been the exile. He's always been the one trying to prove himself to Klingon culture, and
Mhm.
that is exactly what he's challenged with this episode by the advisor to um, Groka. He basically says, "You've never had a chance to really pursue a Klingon woman before. What do you know about pursuing Klingon women?" And Worf is understandably upset by that claim. And so he, through Quark, proves that he is the one that is worthy of Grilka. He's the one who comes up with the right thing to say. You know, get a leg of this one creature when you go to see her at her dinner, and sweep everything off the table and present it to her and say this and get her to talk about her family's history. And then yeah, he just, everything is right
So
according to what Worf does, and it's through Quark that he proves himself. So he gets to do it for us in our eyes, but
right.
for other Klingons, he's still not proved himself, unfortunately. But go ahead, go ahead.
So now I want to break that down a little bit here because this is something that Worf has often been criticized, critiqued, whatever term you want to use for it, for pretty much both over the course of the development of the character. You know, we know from the Next Generation that Worf was an orphan who was later adopted by Sergei and Helena and brought to a human colony, a Russian-based human colony where he was raised. But
Right,
we must also remember that Worf was not a baby when this happened. He wasn't an infant or anything like that. He was old enough. He remembers his parents. He had family members that he had visited frequently on the Klingon homeworld and, you know, that he lived
right,
with and he interacted with and so forth. So you know, we don't know like a precise equivalent human age, but he talks about remembering these things and having these cousins. And, you know, after having gone to be with his Earth parents for a while, then when they tried to let him go back to visit his surviving Klingon family, how they teased him and ridiculed him because they said how much he had changed and now he was different. So I'm going to say that he was probably around, let's say 6 7 years old when he was adopted, and then when he goes
right,
back to deal with his family, he was probably somewhere around 10, 11 years old, and he was ridiculed and
okay,
teased then. And then he kind of does this back and forth bit for a while until he just stops going back to the Klingon homeworld. He stays fully with his human family until he eventually goes into the academy at 18. So he
right,
had plenty of experience with his people, and he also studied his people, and not just like any particular, you know, like any kind of general Klingon cultural stuff. As we see even in this episode, he's able to recognize Grilka by her name. He knows where what region her family is from, and he knows the precise cultural habits of her people in their region. So that shows that he is
right,
a dedicated, if anything else, he's a dedicated researcher to Klingon culture, and he looks at all aspects of Klingon culture, right down to regional specifics.
right,
I don't think even we do that, you know, unless like there's like a job or it's like for a school project or something like that, you know. But could you tell me right offhand what, you know, particular cultural style people in the northeast province of India wear on Sunday? Like, no. Like who
Not at all.
not I mean, like no one does that. So his
Right.
his interest in his people and his culture is obviously very deep. He has a deep connection with that, and it's something that he uses to inform who he is. So while we try to say that he
Right.
is not a true Klingon or anything like that, I would say he's a great representation because he has studied his entire people and he sees the
Right.
entire culture. And I
Right.
really like that they do this and they show that he knows these things. Like he didn't have to go to a Federation database and punch in her name and pull up her stuff. He knew that stuff just from standing there and recalling it,
Right.
active memory, and knew the got to get the leg of Linkta, whatever the heck that is, and the whole ceremony of sweeping it across the table, knock everything off, but that Linkta is it. You got to eat it, and you got to make your declaration, and so forth. He knew the whole thing. So I wish that
Right.
people would pay attention to things like this and stop saying that Worf, that he's some kind of weak or ineffective Klingon or anything like that. He is not. He studies his people and he takes his entire culture very seriously. And yes,
Oh
he has
yeah.
some things about human culture that he has adapted or adopted and brought into himself, and that's, I think even Picard points that out at one point about how Worf has taken kind of the best of both. He's taken the best parts of Klingon culture and the best parts of human culture and try to distill them down and to make those a part of who he is. And I think it's a
Right.
a great statement for Worf, great summation of who that character is, and we see that here. And yeah, he's
Right.
able to do the stuff to win over Grilka through Quark, unfortunately, but he does it. He does it
Yeah.
well.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm surprised that anyone outside the show, like any watchers of the shows, would say that Worf is a bad representative
Oh
of
yeah,
Klingon culture. The whole point is that he is working very, 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 very hard to overcome any sort of shortcomings that he's had because of his history, as you just described it.
mhm,
He might have been away from Klingon culture for a time because he was on Earth with his adopted parents, but he's never given up his Klingonness at all.
right.
If any, as you said, he might have adapted Federation or Earth customs to himself, just because that's where he was placed. He had to adapt, but at no point did he ever give up, betray, surrender his Klingon identity. Um, and yeah, again, my whole point is that it's sad that Worf isn't able to prove himself to Grilka directly. I mean, if the end of the episode, I would have preferred if the end of the episode had ended with Worf storming in and throwing Quark aside and saying, "I did all those things. I was the one who knew to do this and that," and like that be like his way of redemption. Like he has a Klingon woman to pursue, and she decides through his behavior, and like, she decides that she's gonna be the one that helps him redeem his reputation. She's gonna sacrifice her house to help rehabilitate him. That's how I would like things to go if I were writing it, but we have other things in mind. Dax, in particular, has other things in mind. And finally, she gets a chance to really shine in an episode.
She
She is
does.
just as important to this episode
She
as
does.
Worf and Quark are. I had forgot that Cisco even had a line in this episode. I was trying to remember what it was, and it's when when Worf sees Grilka, and it's Jadzia who says you have Parmak, so she's the one who basically comes up with the name for this episode. You're looking for Parmak in all the wrong places, and Cisco overhears it when they get to Ops and asks what's going on, and that's it. He's gone.
That's true. Like we don't see.
Cisco's barely in it at
That's
all.
true. We don't see him ever again. It's interesting that we don't see him.
Right.
It's like he just had one line, just came out of his office, tossed the baseball, and then he's gone again. It's like okay,
That's it. He
okay,
was gonzo. He was not here pretty much at all, which is fine because again, basically he traded with Dax, the place of character whose place in the episode is minimal and
right.
non-existent.
Who's totally
Um,
superfluous, and we could have done without you being here at all, let
exactly.
alone
I literally forgot he even
yeah.
said anything until I was racking my brain. I was like, "There's got to be something."
So this may
Um,
be one of the few episodes where every main character, has a speaking part. everyone is represented. We don't see Garrick, but Garrick is not listed as a main cast. He is a recurring character or an ensemble character. He's kind of in the same position as like Jake and Nog, even though,
Yeah.
like he, whatever he's on, he contributes a lot. But yes, he kind of has that same kind of ranking as them, you know. Yeah, but yeah, all the main characters we see in this episode and get at least one part. So interesting
Well,
distinction.
all of the named casts always have at least one line, which is why I knew Cisco must have had said something. Because even Dax in episodes where I'm like she barely appeared, she always has at least one line. Every one of the main cast has at least one line in every episode. But characters that are recurring, like Keiko and Garrick and those characters, yeah, they may not have anything, but they're still a regular feature every now and then. Um, but yeah, speaking of that,
No, no,
Keiko,
no, no, no. We're not going to go
you
to
want to
the
wait?
O'Briens yet.
You
I
want to
want to
wait on
get. I
that?
want to get
Okay,
through
we'll
the.
save it. We'll
Yes, I
save it.
want to get through
Okay.
our Klingon, our budding Klingon romances here.
Okay.
So one of my favorite scenes in their particular dynamic is where Worf is just they've just finished their first round of training in the holodeck, and it's Worf, Quark, and Jadzia, and they've just done their big battle, and they're trying to get Quark to recite the lines, and he's racking his brains trying to get through the Klingonese, and finally it just they end the simulation, and he's like, yeah, you need to go rest, go to bed, because even if you're tired, Worf won't be able to save you, and so forth. So this leaves Jadzia and Worf alone, and Worf is like, I can't believe the lengths I'm going through to help this Ferengi, and I was thinking about it, I was like, you know what, he's absolutely right, because it's like, what are you guys doing? Like,
Yeah.
do you not have
Totally.
jobs that you should be like we don't
Yeah.
is the amount of seeming downtime that they have for this nonsense. Worf, you're the
Yeah.
strategic operations officer for the entire sector, and you're in the
Yes.
holodeck playing around with the Ferengi bartender and your science officer, who should also be like running scans or doing
Well,
some
and
kind of
O'Brien and Kira both are like not
no one's
busy at
doing any
all
kind
this
of work. Like
episode.
that's the whole episode is no one's doing any work. I'm just like, what is
After the
happening?
intensity of the last two episodes, yeah,
Right.
everyone's like, "Oh man, I'm taking vacation."
They
Yeah.
even they even broke out the technology so they can sync Worf's body to Quark's body. Like,
Which
where did you get that? Like,
where's
where
that?
is that being
Yeah.
stored? What cargo bay
Yeah.
is that
Why
in?
haven't we had a plot line where this was used
Yes,
before? Where is a
you
future
can't.
plot line going to be like, why didn't we have that?
Right.
Yeah.
This is the thing that we broke out this revolutionary technology for, is so that this Ferengi can fool this Klingon woman. It's never occurred to anyone else this could have been used for,
Yeah.
I don't know, anything else, like ever.
Yeah.
But then, again, Worf and Jadzia have a little bit of their verbal sparring, and then she says, "If I was in your shoes, I would go for somebody who was a bit more fun and way more accessible." And Worf's like, "You are not in my shoes," and she's like, "Too bad. You'd be amazed at what I could do in this pair of size 18 boots." And then hightails it out. It's like I love their interplay, but also I was like, huh. Worf wears a size 18, eh? My feet are bigger than Worf's. I wear bigger shoes than that Klingon. That's great.
Oh man.
Little moments like that that
Ah.
just, yeah, the whole scene was great. But that for me personally, I'm always like, yeah, that's right, Worf. You may think you're the big man. I got you beat.
Right. Right. Um. Yeah. The one thing. I mean, I knew that Jadzia and Worf were going to get together because unfortunately, I just know that's how their character arcs are going to go that route. I wasn't sure when it was going to begin, so I was surprised that this is the episode where it like gets jump started. Like I thought it was going to be more of a slow burn,
Hmm.
frankly, where like Worf, I don't know, like that they grew closer together and then something happened, as opposed to Worf being kind of blind to Dax's attraction to him, and then her basically dragging him down,
Yeah,
saying,
and it seems
"Come
kind
here."
of odd because they go from not being, or for him being completely oblivious to now we have to get married, you know.
Yes,
Now,
yeah, that literally happens in this
yeah.
like 5 minutes
Now
in this
she
show.
does,
Yeah.
she's pretty much telling him that that's not what's going to happen. She makes a very, um, she makes a point of telling him how he's not a traditional man, so following tradition is not going to be in their wheelhouse, And she's saying, "Let's take this a day at a time." So basically, she is establishing the relationship. So yes, it does seem like if we're just going to go straight through and follow tradition, that's the next step is marriage here. But we know also from how these two are acting and how they're going to proceed here that that's not necessarily the case. We know they are going to do basically dating, establishing a relationship, seeing how things work and function and so forth. So we can look forward to that. But so like I said at the beginning of the episode, this episode kind of solidified for me those moments of why I think Jadzia is a great character and why I defend her character and love her so much. And it's because she's so versatile and she can play with so many characters. Like even in the moments when it was just like her and Quark talking, she's great.
Hmm.
Their chemistry and their friendship is evident, and the way that she is able to kind of interpret Worf for Quark, because obviously Worf was very frustrated with this whole scenario, but she was kind of helping them both to see each other's point and at least be willing to work together. Like, there's no way that if Quark had gone to Worf on his own and tried to talk about this situation, that Worf would have in any way been understanding or helpful or anything like that. That it just never would
Right.
have happened. But Jadzia being this intermediary really helps establish this kind of working relationship for the two of them.
Right.
And then, of course, we see the way that she kind of teases Worf and their chemistry together, which again is just very obvious when it's just the two of them and they're working together, talking together, and so forth. I'm surprised that this didn't happen sooner. The way that they kind of pair
Right.
them up, because it seems like they are always, when they are together, they they work well. They look good together.
Right.
I don't know. Would you agree with that or not?
Dax and Worf.
Yes.
Um, I'll say it this way. At the moment, I'm not yet fully convinced. At the end of the episode, when they're in the infirmary and they've gone off because is Bashir is super like, oh my gosh, Quark and Grilka just came in here, and I know exactly why they're here. And now here come Worf and Dax for the exact same reason. Like Bashir's brain is short circuiting all over the place. But anyway, they're off private, and Dax and him are talking. And I forget which one of them mentions that tradition. I guess it's Worf who says that traditionally this means we're now married, and she's like, "Well, I don't think you're a traditional man." Which I was like, "Wait a minute, that's kind of the whole thing about Worf is he's trying really hard to maintain tradition as best he can. Like he'll adapt when he has to, but like
Well,
Worf will
yeah,
do
because
the
what she
right thing.
says, yeah, because she says, let's face it, at the end of the day, you're not that traditional. She doesn't say that you're not a traditional man, but it's more you're not that traditional, which kind of again leads us back to Worf, who he understands the tradition, but he has incorporated a lot of things that allow him to be a little bit more flexible with some things than
Circumstances
other.
have forced him to
Yeah,
not be traditional, is how I
right.
would say it. Yeah. And then while she's saying all that, she like they were like sitting next to each other, and then she like stands up and like grabs his arm and has like pulls his arm around her in this like romantic kind of gentle gesture. Which my point is that from what we know of Klingon culture, it just doesn't come off as like she has presented herself as understanding his Klingonness. Like when
Mhm.
they do that battle at the end of the episode, they do the back and forth Klingon language conversation, the ritual, like that's how she always appeals to him. She's already very knowledgeable of Ferengi culture. They
Hmm.
argue about opera at the beginning of the episode for Klingon opera. Um, Even before Worf showed up, we knew she appreciated culture, and so that's how she's always approached him. And so for this moment of them in private, then having this non-Klingon moment of intimacy, of like again pulling his arm around her,
Hmm.
where like he's trying to figure out what their relationship is. I guess what I'm getting at is I want Worf to really drive this at this point. Like if it's just
Yeah.
Dax who's just dragging Worf along, then I'm never gonna be happy with it. I
Well,
want Worf to be the guy, at least stand up and be like the man in a bit and be like, okay, like I want this. Not only does
s-
Dax want this, but I want this. I'm gonna fight for it. I'm gonna do this, do that. At the moment, Dax has driven it. Worf has been kind of dragged along, which
mhm.
sometimes that happens in relationships. Don't get me wrong. I just want Worf to. I want Worf to come to the conclusion that he wants this and then pursue
So,
it. So
so on that, I'm just going to say, stay tuned. Again, you haven't seen the show before, so yeah, just stay tuned. But I will also say that the ending where it shows them having this intimate moment, and she's got his arm wrapped around her, she makes him laugh later on. Even earlier on, where they are talking about the finer points of Klingon opera, and she points out, you were raised by humans, you wear a Federation uniform, you drink prune juice, all these things. I liked it because she has taken an interest in him, and she has noticed these things about him, and it's an interesting way that she's telling him, I feel anyway, that she gets him, she understands him, which is
right,
something that he has been searching for a long time, is this kind of acceptance that he hasn't gotten from anyone. Even
right,
when he was, trying to be with Kalar. Kalar was, while she was interested in Worf and wanted to be with Worf, she also actively shunned everything Klingon. She didn't
right,
embrace anything about being Klingon at all, even though she's only, half Klingon. She didn't try to embrace her culture, her heritage at all. You know, and then when he was, briefly with Deanna, he didn't have to worry about any, the cultural aspect, because she wasn't a part of the culture at all. you
right,
know and now that he's got the attention of Jadzia, this person who obviously understands and has worked with the Klingon culture for, not just one but two lifetimes. There's a whole different level of understanding that Jadzia brings to him that he couldn't get anywhere else. And then on top of that, she also just is noticing him as an individual, and that's what I liked about the softness at the end, because it's like she's pointing out the fact that there's more to him than just this. We need to strictly abide by Klingon ritual, Klingon custom, so forth.
right.
So I just think that was a great moment, and I'm looking forward to, and I was looking forward to seeing how their relationship progresses. There's a lot that happens between the two of them. We're going to get to see all of that. So yeah, again, I'm just going to say, uh, stay tuned.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
um,
because what I want for a Worf in a relationship, and this, I mean, I like the idea of Grilka because he would have been very passionate to pursue her. He has the knowledge to have. I mean, as we can see with what he does with Quark, he had the knowledge to at least start a relationship, even though
mhm.
he's dishonored right now.
But I
Poor
think I
Worf.
think
But
Tumek makes a very good point. He tells Worf too. He's just like, you didn't do anything wrong,
yeah,
but have you ever
well,
actually?
I'll
He's
talk about that.
asking. He's like, have you ever actively pursued a true Klingon woman? Have you been involved with a Klingon woman before?
Right,
No, he hasn't. He's like, okay, so I mean, it's just like I don't think it would have been a good match for you. The expectations go beyond just cultural formality. You may be able to get the
exactly.
cultural things correct, but
Right,
then when it comes to the actual day-to-day intimacies of being in a full Klingon relationship, you don't have that experience,
right,
unfortunately.
right,
So he's just saying, I just don't think that that would have worked out long term. You might have been
right,
able to walk your way through the ritual up to a certain point, but then when
right.
it comes to the day-to-day exchange and so forth, you probably wouldn't have done well at that part. That's what I
Yeah,
think
and
Tumek was saying to him there.
Yeah, that's a great point. Definitely to reiterate that that's is his emphasis is that yeah, you weren't wrong to try and pursue her here at Quark's bar in that scene, which is really that was another awkward moment because he goes up to Morn and he says,
I
um,
will apologize for this at a later time, and then
exactly, and then
hurls him from his
throws him
chair.
and then demands blood wine. He's yelling, and then he says, "Who's stinking up the place?" and turns to the bodyguard. And that whole scene really comes off as awkward. But maybe that's actually the point. I mean, it is, I guess, is
I
that
think that is the point. It's to show just how um
naive he is about
yes,
this. Okay,
that he just doesn't have the full experience. Does anybody follow the ritual to this precise a degree? Probably not.
no,
But obviously it is still the ritual, it is still the custom, so
right,
it's obvious what he's doing. But
right,
again, as Tumek is pointing out here, like you didn't do anything wrong, you got the steps right, but it's, I guess it's kind of the spirit of the thing
right,
is not quite there, which is funny that he points this out to Worf, who then kind of says the same thing to Quark when they're practicing the Kalis and Lucara hollow match,
right,
and Quark is struggling. He's like, you gotta put yourself in this place, in this time. Think about what's
right,
going on. He's saying the same thing. You say the words, but there is no feeling behind them. So it's like, yeah, he takes the same criticism that was just laid at him through Tumek, and he takes it to Quark as well.
right, right. Yeah. But again, I just want to just reiterate that what I want for Worf, his stiffness as a character, he's stiff. He's trying to be Klingon. He's just kind of prickly sometimes, not in a unpleasant way for us, the audience, but just he is trying to be something. I want him
Yes.
to, if in a relationship with a woman, whether it be Dax or anyone else, we know it's going to be Dax, but if it were anyone else, just in general, I want him to be less stiff, but I also want that firmness of character, that strength of character, that firmness to come out at certain points. Like
Hmm.
when Warp has to step up, he always steps up. I don't want him to lose his ability to step up, but I do want him to be more relaxed, more not as stiff, not as uptight. And if Dax could do that for him, I hope that's what happens.
Okay.
And again, I what I want for him is I want Worf to be okay with and pursue and be pleased with a relationship with anyone he chooses to pursue. If it had been Grilka, great point. It might have been all formality for him, and he wouldn't know how to do anything else because he's just a stiff board.
Yeah.
Whereas Dax, as the pursuer, she's the one who's willing to go after a Worf a bit, and therefore make accommodations for him, challenge him in her way, in the ways that she as you said, she knows Worf, she knows him.
Yeah.
That's her whole angle: is I know you, and I like you, I want you.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
yeah,
think again that's probably why again I started to defend, or I do defend her so much, is because Worf is such a misunderstood character, which is it's just so strange to me, because in so many instances with Trek characters, we often find ourselves rooting for these kind of isolated misfit characters, but I feel like Worf gets kind of a mixed bag on that. There are some who will support him overall. But then there's so many who are like, oh, he's like, I saw a while back, we talked about this, about how they were criticizing Worf, saying that B'Elanna was more Klingon than Worf is. And just like, how could you possibly think that, But, just all of these things like that come to mind when I see people who say that, oh, Worf is some kind of, what was it? It's like there was a term, um, like a Japanese affectation or something like that that was used for him. I didn't like that
oh right,
either, but it's just like all of those things when his character, we see the development of the character, and we hear so much about the past that very much affected his overall development, and yet he still doesn't seem to get the same kind of backing and support until Jadzia comes along and kind of like makes a lot of those things that we would see as off or eccentric, especially in his representation of his Klingon side, as totally understandable and okay. And she makes
hmm
them relatable. And
hmm
then, I think she ultimately makes Worf, um, yeah, both relatable and likable, more likable than he was. So,
right.
but again,
By the
that's
way,
just
that
me.
that term you're looking for is weeaboo.
Yeah, we talked about that once before a while back, I think, and I
It
didn't
was it
like it
was
then, and
yeah.
I don't like it now.
Yeah. No, but that term of someone who wants to be Japanese who isn't, let's go weeaboo.
Yeah,
So yeah,
and so they were saying that was what Worf was for his own Klingon culture, and I was like, that doesn't it doesn't
make
track.
any
It doesn't make
sense
sense. He
at all.
already
Nope.
is Klingon. He
Right.
can't you can't accuse him of being less,
Yeah.
And
You
I
can't
also feel
accuse a Japanese person of being a weeaboo, even if they did grow 100% up outside of Japan. The idea is that someone who is Japanese trying to understand Japanese culture is trying to understand their own culture. It's someone outside that culture trying to treat an outside culture, and they're not
right,
their culture, as better than themselves, is just awkward and strange and
right. It's like and the people
patronizing
who
in some way.
yeah, and it's like the people who tend to level this kind of accusation against other people often tend to be people also outside of that culture. It's just like, how are you going to judge someone by a cultural standard that you yourself do not abide by, ascribe
Yeah.
to, or whatever? How can you say that? So it's just
Right.
like, shut up. Is I guess
Right.
the my whole speech comes back to that. Just shut up. Just let them, I think he does a great job representing Klingon culture. I think that he's probably one of the better representations of Klingons that we see because he is such a stickler for doing the right thing, the honorable thing, not just the thing that's going to always get him, you know, a victory every time, you know.
Right.
So, but that's enough. That's enough of our A story, I'm gonna say, because we want to definitely turn our attention to the other love triangle that we have developed here, that we see developed here, and that would
Oh
be
man.
the O'Briens. We have Keiko, we have Miles, and we have Kira.
Yeah, she's
So
an O'Brien now, apparently.
yes. So now, before we get into them, I want to remind you. Do you remember that when we first talked about her living with them, how it would have been a funny kind of like a sitcom within this show if they had also had Julian move in, and so we would have
Ah.
had Julian and Kira with Miles and Keiko. I feel like we get elements of that here because
Oh.
even though Julian is not living with them, he's definitely running commentary on what's going on.
Well, I mean, the whole opening scene is him doing exactly that. He's trying to eavesdrop in on the O'Brien family, and Quark, with his big ears, can hear everything and starts giving Bashir a hard time. And we think that it's Keiko and Miles arguing because we've seen them argue plenty of times. But then it turns out that it's actually Kira that's arguing with Miles, which is interesting because the whole point of this episode turns out, from their perspective, to be basically Kira's kind of turning into this romantic interest for Miles, which just
Yeah,
it's
so it's an interesting dynamic development to say the least. She's
yes,
living with them, so there's a level of familiarity and comfortability that comes from a shared living space.
right,
And then there's the added intimacy of the fact that through carrying the baby and having various bits of discomfort, as she's working her way through this pregnancy, Miles seems to be the one that is able to take care of a lot of her needs and issues. And this goes beyond just, like we see him in the beginning, he's picking up medicines for Kira.
right,
And, he's now helping her out of the bathtub. We hear that story. And
right,
so we know there's that level of intimacy now. He's seen her naked, basically, is the basically the whole point of that story. Is
right,
he's seen her naked.
right,
He's massaging her, he's rubbing her legs, her feet, he's massaging her back. He's doing all these things, and he's also relating very personal stories to her. So they're getting to know each other well beyond that professional stance, and even to a certain degree, a bit more familiar because I mean again there's a constant close contact that
yeah.
we're seeing. So is it possible that they could have developed such an intense intimacy so quickly, or I mean, we don't really know necessarily the timeline. We know that she's about a month away from her due date, which, again, remember, as we had talked about before, we knew they were going to be fudging the numbers a bit when it comes to her pregnancy term. We know that Bajorans have a gestational period of 5 months to a human's 9 months, but we also know that the baby had already been developing for a while inside of Kira. So,
Right.
or not Kira, but
Oh,
Keiko,
Keiko. Yeah.
before transplanted to Kira. So because of this, her pregnancy seems to have been sped along a bit. Is it going to be the full 5 months? I don't think so. Because I think at the time of transplantation, Keiko was somewhere around 2 to 3 months pregnant
Right.
at the time. So
Right.
now baby is in Kira. And so we're probably looking at what, 2 months there?
Right.
2 months, maybe 3 months of pregnancy if they've got another month left.
Right.
So yeah,
Yeah.
that's
That
what we're
seems
looking
about
at on
right.
times. Yeah,
But it's a brilliant way of just saying, "Hey, not a visitor might be having a real life baby at some point. We don't know when.
yeah.
We're gonna work that
Basically,
out when it comes up."
and I always like to try to think of like the behind the scenes reasons. And it's like probably what happened was she got pregnant, and maybe she was one of those women who like doesn't show her pregnancy until later stages. So she was probably pregnant for a while, and just no one knew it. And then finally, it became a, well, now you're too big to hide it. We
Right.
have to say something. We have to
Right.
do something. And then
Yeah.
it was like, well, when are you due? And and she told her like, what? What? What do you mean you're
Yeah.
due in 4 months? Like that's not possible. Hey, how
Yeah.
did you hide 5 months of pregnancy from us? And she's like, you know. So yeah,
Yeah,
um,
she has some maternity clothes in this episode too, and as
yes,
well, like
Garrick,
her
Garrick,
outfit or her uniform has a maternal version, a
yes.
maternity dress version.
Her uniforms and her shoes are modified by Garrick. So we actually get a reference to Garrick at least.
Yes.
Are modified by Garrick to make her more comfortable so she can continue to work.
Right.
And yes, so now they have this great intimacy, familiarity with each other. And I don't know, I was just I was thinking about it as I was watching this, and the way that they are dealing with her pregnancy, and all the medicines to help with her swelling, to get the rashes under control, to do all this stuff. And I mean, it's just like, is it? Do you feel like it's possible? Will that be a thing? Would you feel that kind of connection for this person who's carrying your baby or not? Like, I don't know.
Well, that's the obviously the sci-fi element of the episode is she's carrying this baby, but I have to say that's why it feels so strange for let me put it this way. I feel like as an adult, if you had to help someone out of a bath, you should be mature enough to help someone, even if it's someone of the opposite sex, not your wife, even if they're beautiful, very attractive, that you can still maintain a professional thing. And that's basically what he says to Bashir. When Bashir is questioning about that, he's like, I was professional about it. I held it up in a way that I wasn't like looking directly at her. But then when you see them together, like he's giving the massage and they start feeling it, they start feeling too intimate. I guess the thing that got me is like it feels like they felt like a line was being bumped up against, and so they tried dealing with it, but they
Mhm.
did kind of a bad job of dealing with the line.
Yeah, yeah, because I mean,
Like,
because that's kind of the whole point. Because like he's talking about how they've maintained, like they are adults. They can have these adult relationships, and it's not going to be this kind of high schoolish thing, right?
right,
But I
yes,
mean, that turns out to be a little bit of a lie because we see that between two of them, they have developed some kind of infatuation with her. I don't want to say full on romantical or anything, but they've developed
yeah,
some kind of infatuation with each other that seems to have been bred specifically from the fact that they are spending so much time together. It's not about her being pregnant, but it's about him doing so much for her and them learning about each other through that.
right,
It seems like Keiko, while she's around, maybe she's not always around as much as it seems like O'Brien is. Because, like, again, if you think about it, even at the beginning, Keiko was not home,
right,
but Miles and Kira were, and they
right,
were interacting with each other. Yes, at the time they were arguing, but still they were interacting. Then they also worked together, so they're seeing each
right,
other also at work and interacting.
Right.
Then, again, they're home and they're doing massages, and somewhere along the day, he's picking up medicine for her, you
Right.
know? And so it just seems like their interaction has increased significantly, and Keiko is not always around. And she
Right.
even says to Miles when Kira says she's going to Bajor, she's like, "I can't go. I've got
This
whatever work thing to
seminar
do."
tomorrow. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So something is keeping Keiko away
Right.
and allowing a lot of the heavy lifting in this pregnancy and in this whole interaction to fall to Miles.
Right.
And this would seem to be the catalyst for their infatuation.
Yeah, and I do like, for example, O'Brien comes home 2 hours early to be with Keiko, and then Kira shows up, and she's like, "I'm gonna go take a quick holiday vacation trip," and they're all like, "What?" And that definitely does like, hey, Kira, they're not gonna be happy with you just jumping out for a few days. Like, yeah, Keiko is totally right. Like, they don't know when you're gonna pop, because this is a whole weird situation.
I
I
mean, that's
guess,
kind of the whole reason that you moved in the first place. They wanted to be able to keep an eye on you and be
right,
a part of the experience. So you suddenly up and leaving for a week, especially now that we're even closer to your due date, yeah,
right.
probably not gonna fly.
Well, and then the fact that Keiko doesn't at all catch on that it's getting awkward between O'Brien and Kira, like that's what kind of gets me is like I feel like Keiko would normally be a little more
But again, Keiko's not I just feel like
insightful.
Keiko's not really around. I think that,
Yeah.
yes,
Well,
if
that's
she
that's my
was
whole point
around
though
more,
is that
yeah.
it's even then I feel like she still would be a little bit more like, for example, I would put it this way. When we first see Kira being massaged by O'Brien, the both of them are in like PJs, and Kira's PJs are very nice. She looks great in that nightie of
But
whatever she's got
they're
on.
home. They're
I
home.
know. My
Who
point though
who
is
would
is
be
that
still wearing their uniform at home?
well, that's not my point. Uniform. I'm talking about PJs. I'm not talking about like
Well, she is.
hell.
She
Get me
she
a
definitely is. I don't know what we could classify what O'Brien's
Jake.
wearing as. Yeah.
Yeah. O'Brien.
Yeah,
We're
he's
O'Brien.
not wearing a Jake Cisco special, that's for sure. But
Well, but it's. I almost wish he was though, because I like that looked like PJs that he was wearing, and so it just. My point is that when Keiko walks in, brings in these clothes, and sees the two of them like that, I feel like anyone would be naturally kind of like that's kind of an intimate situation. Maybe they
oh
did
yeah,
this before, but
absolutely.
like I guess what I'm getting at too is like what I wish the episode had done is like Keiko and O'Brien kind of mourn the fact that this
Okay.
is a weird situation where like O'Brien like goes to Keiko and says, I had a really great time massaging Kira, but I realized while I was doing that I wish this was supposed to be you, and I love you, and I'm sorry that
Oh,
this is
I
kind of
see what
actually
okay. I see
I
what you're
wish,
saying.
and then Kira in the middle of being pregnant and hating being pregnant, then being like, oh man, I'm carrying this child, and it's so nice to be able to relax and have a loved one, like just massage me and give me relax because I do feel kind of tired and exhausted, and then thinking about First Minister Shakar and
I
being
see what you're
like,
saying. Like,
like
then basically you're saying that if they had been using this situation as a way to kind of reinforce
their own
their
relationships.
their own relationships, like,
Yes.
because I'm doing this thing for you, it makes me wish it was this other person.
Right,
Like,
and that be the
I'm carrying
awkwardness
this
of
right, that being the awkwardness. I'm carrying this baby, which is fine,
right,
but I wish that it was my baby with Shakar, not your and
right,
Keiko's baby. Because once the
yeah, like
baby is born, I'm done. Like, I'm there's no other attachment. And then him being
exactly,
like, we were looking forward to having this pregnancy experience together. I wish it was you I was helping out of the tub. I wish it was you that I was
right,
massaging and doing these things for. I okay, I see what you're saying. And so then
and then
them having
and
this
then
moment of
and
of
then like during the massage,
catharsis.
Kira being like, "Oh man, I really enjoy your massages, O'Brien. It's too bad that I won't get them ever again. Like I'll never have these ever again." And then realizing like the two of them, like, well, why wouldn't he ever get well because of the baby? And then that like
Yeah.
just setting off this chain reaction where like it gets awkward in the house, not
Mhm.
because O'Brien and Kira are now
Yes.
romantically attracted. I don't believe that. I don't, Kira. I
I
don't believe
think
Kira was
okay.
ever romantically attracted to O'Brien. So this episode tries to suggest that that's kind of where they're like leaning, and then like maybe in another universe. No,
I
that's not
so
the
yeah,
characters. Yeah.
I think that the issue with that is they were trying so hard. I guess they were wanting to show us a more involved kind of relationship status. That having this extra person in the relationship and having this kind of familiarity um, presents with a different kind of problem. Because I agree. I think that, to a certain degree, her living there, while I can see why they would have done that, and that makes sense. Him giving her massages and she's wearing, a nightie or whatever that is. I don't think that would have happened. Like that's a level of comfortability that I feel like could only really come from maybe like really knowing and doing that for that person over a couple of years.
Right.
There's a greater familiarity there because again, we don't know the precise timeline, but again, if you're following all this, she's only been living with them for a couple of months at
Right. At
most.
most.
So
Yeah.
for them
Yeah.
to already be like they're seeing each other, naked and whatever, all that other stuff, I just don't know if that would have happened,
Right.
like if she needed help getting in and out of the tub, which I don't understand why she would need that in the 24th century. You mean to tell me they haven't figured out a way to get her something that she can get herself in and out easily, or that Keiko wouldn't have been able to also assist in this using some kind of leverage technology to get her in and out if necessary? I
Right.
just I didn't believe. I don't think that is true.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think they wanted us to really buy into the fact that there is a very close familiarity between
Right.
them, and
Right.
trying to define what that familiarity is where they want us to have an issue. So much so they even made that into a little bit of a joke there when Odo is questioning Kira in his
Right.
office, and he's like, "Oh, I've noticed that your tone has changed when you talk about Chief O'Brien. Oh, excuse
Right.
me, Miles. Like
Yes.
he highlights the fact
That
that
was
there
a
has been
great
this.
scene, I
Yeah,
have to say. Odo on the offensive in terms of questioning people. What part of the family?
yes.
What do you mean by
She's like,
that?
I'm living with them. I'm carrying his baby. It's like I'm a part of the family. And he's like, which part?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
daughter, cousin. What
Yeah.
are you? Yes,
Sister? Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So again, him highlighting the fact that even to outsiders, this is an interesting situation, and that there are certain changes that are noticeable. So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think they do a great job overall with telling us kind of an entertaining story. I was trying to, I wouldn't necessarily say it was funny or anything like that, but they certainly tell us an entertaining story.
Right.
And yeah, the ending though of them getting all the way into the shuttle and being like, "Oh, would have been nice in another life" or whatever. I don't know I think that was a little too much.
Yes. That's my
Um,
point.
they probably
Yeah.
could have ended before that, or found another way to present that. I think, like,
Right.
stop making us think that these two are, it's like there, but for the flip of a coin, they
Yeah.
would have done this thing. That's kind of how they're
Exactly.
trying to present this, and
Yeah,
I
we're in
don't
season 5 by
agree.
now. I don't believe these
Yeah,
characters who've been interacting for years now are suddenly realizing the romantic chemistry.
yeah,
Yeah, it doesn't work. Um, I really, yeah, and, I mean, it's such a funny scene too because she's describing this absolutely fantastic retreat home.
this
It sounds
cottage in the middle
wonderful
of
and
the woods.
amazing.
It does, and
Yeah,
I'm like, you know what? They should just do a whole thing where we go to Bajor and like explore stuff because that sounded awesome. I'd love to see
yeah.
that little that
Survive the
place.
Cardassian occupation, etc.,
Yeah,
etc.
like it's so old. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. I was like, wait a minute, it's how old? Sitting in the middle of the woods and it's made it through all the devastation. No one's come through and ransacked this place or
Yeah,
stripped it or burned it or nothing. And it's just there. Come on. Like
yeah. And I
you
and
you don't tell me the Cardassian occupation was a bad time and then you tell me about that place. Something's
yeah,
gotta give here. These two things
yeah.
don't work.
Yeah, and this for me it just reiterates that like I would have liked to see Shakar and her and Kira go to the retreat. Like maybe we don't have to see it or even see him. I mean, I would like to still see him because it's been a while since we've actually seen the character, even though she's supposed to be in a relationship with him. But like Again, my whole point is, I wish this storyline had, instead of making it this weird, awkward O'Brien Kira love triangle thing building, it had just caused the two of them to like just like
Yeah.
what I want is what I'm getting at. What I want from characters, and this is a hard thing to do, and this is why I have a hard time writing myself. So I'm not saying it's the easy thing to do, but what I want from characters is I want them to mourn the lost things in their life sometimes, and I
Oh, I'm
feel
all
like
for
this would
that.
have been a
I'm all for
I
that too. I
I
like seeing them, have those things that kind of bring them low, and then I
right
like seeing those moments where they almost think that they're over it, and then
right
something triggers the memory that kind of brings them back to let you
right
see that this is a process you have to work through. You don't just get to turn the page and it's all better.
yes
You have to do the work. You got to go through the
yeah.
process. So
I
yeah,
I would have
um,
rather seen like Keiko have like a kind of an emotional breakdown a bit of like, this is supposed to be my baby, and I'm all, I can't, I'm not giving it my baby my full attention anymore, and I feel like a bad mother. Like that would have felt more real to me
yeah,
than this way they did things. But maybe it
yeah.
was
They
just a
tried to make
time
her.
constraint.
I'm
Go
sure,
ahead.
yeah, I'm sure that there is. I'm sure there was a lot of, because I mean, they're trying to do an A and a B story here, so
Yes.
there's always going
Right.
to be a time issue. But I think that would have been, they did try to make it seem like Keiko was just so happy and so positive, and she's so mature, like she wants them to stop fighting and they have to get along, and
Right.
she's working still, and she's got time to pick up uniforms, and isn't she so chipper about the massaging and she's just walking in and out of the rooms and dropping things off. She's okay with everything. This is another woman living in her house, carrying her baby and having these intimate moments with her husband, and she's fine with it. I would have loved for there to be kind of a little bit of a resentment stage for Keiko a little bit,
Yes.
like maybe at the same time that these two are kind of getting close and having these weird, awkward, semi-intimate moments, we also get these flashes of Keiko being kind of depressed or
Right.
again angry and resentful or whatever. Like that should be me. Like that should be
Right.
me in there
Right.
getting those massages. That should be
Right.
me having the
Exactly.
rash.
Exactly.
Not just O'Brien being like, man, I really wish this was my wife, but also Keiko being like, I wish that was me. And maybe
Yes.
we could have also had like Shakar, maybe not there, but maybe he could have been calling, right?
Yeah,
Like he could
I'd
have
have been
been,
fine with that,
right.
100%,
Like
yeah.
he can't get to the station. He's the first minister. So yeah, he can't leave the planet to come up
Right.
to the space station to be with his girlfriend.
Yeah,
I think
maybe it
they've
was Shakar
established,
who's like, "I got this great cabin in the woods," and
right,
Kira's
like I
like,
hope
"Well, I
you're
can't leave
okay.
now."
Right.
Yeah,
I hope you're okay. I want you to be comfortable. You're working too hard. Like him maybe pushing that angle and her getting mad at him because she's like, stop trying to make me stop living my life or doing these things. But he's like, I just want to like that kind of stuff that we see
yeah,
in actual relationships when people like when that's always like the I guess the classic tale of the woman gets pregnant and the guy wants her to kind of scale back her schedule, take care of herself a bit for the sake
right,
of the pregnancy, but she
right,
still wants to prove she can do things. And now she's getting that on both sides. She's got O'Brien who's like, you're not going to go play spring ball. You're carrying my baby. And then she's got Shakar, who's like, maybe you should come and take a vacation. I've got this sprawling cottage in the Musula province with
yeah.
all this, whatever.
We
Come
just
out here.
renovated we just renovated the
Yeah,
cabin. The Cardassian occupation was still the
we were,
stink of it was still over the cabin.
right.
We just got it finished. Yeah, something like that.
We excavated it and restored it, and it's this beautiful tourist attraction, and as the first minister I get first dibs and I want to take you.
Yeah,
Like I'm just saying, like that would
yeah,
have been an
yeah,
interesting kind of addition to the story, and like her being like no, 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 until finally she's realizing she needs to like get out and get away, and now she's
right,
taking him up on it, and he's calling all the time, and he's like
right,
all of those little things that kind of would have made more tension
right,
here in their story. But as we said, like this was clearly supposed to be the B plot of
right.
this episode. So
Yeah,
all of those extra things would have definitely changed the tone of
right,
the episode and
right.
probably would have made this a contender for a plot. Definitely,
Yes,
you know.
100%. The way
Yeah.
we're editing the story, 100%. I don't.
So now this is us
Yeah,
editing, looking back again, a show that is 30 years old, and we've got all these years of experience of watching and reading shows and books and stuff that have been developed over the intervening years, which were
right,
influenced by shows like this. Like we
100%.
wouldn't have some of those things if it wasn't for what they did in shows like Deep Space
Right.
Nine. So I always
Exactly.
want to give credit where credit's due, and highlight the fact that we are critiquing a show that was, again, that's 30 years old and was already pushing the envelope at its heyday.
Right.
So yeah,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And don't get me wrong. I still enjoyed the episode for what it's worth.
yeah,
Again, I
it's
always
still a
like
very entertaining episode.
I
Yeah.
like critiquing stuff because I always like to imagine how I would have done things and how to improve it.
Mhm.
So, um, yeah. So a lot of
Well,
love triangles in this episode.
yes. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to go through, and it's a good rewatch too. Because I mean, I feel like you get to pick up on a couple of things that maybe you didn't pay attention to the first time around. Like for example, how Worf knows things about Grilka, what region she's from, cultural significance of things.
Right.
Also, kind of take the words of Tumek to to heart there a little bit, and like kind of allow that to. He's not necessarily criticizing Worf specifically, but he's talking about overall a life experience here.
Right.
Now, I do want to say really quick that Tumek is played by Joseph Ruskin, who many may recognize from his, he's it was a prolific character actor. He was in a lot of different shows and movies and stuff throughout his career, and he was also in Star Trek a few times. He was Galt in the TOS episode "The Gamesters of Triskelion," I believe is how
Okay.
you pronounce that.
Okay.
He's Tumek here. He was in another Deep Space Nine episode as just a Cardassian informant, which I'm trying to think if we see him. Yes. So in the episode, is it the second season ender going into the third where we're dealing with the true way and the circle, or is that the first season ending going into the second? I think that's what it
I,
was.
well,
Ending of the first season going into the, yes, it's part of
three
it's that
parter is the
three-parter.
first three episodes of second season. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So that he's in that three-parter. He's the Cardassian informant who tells Odo about the shipment of weapons, and we just only see his eyes. He like is a Cardassian but in
Oh,
shadow. So
interesting.
that's
Okay.
him. Yes. He's in the Star Trek Insurrection movie. He's one of the background alien officers. He's in Deep Space Nine, not Deep Space Nine, I'm sorry. He's in Voyager. He plays an elderly Klingon who advises a very young Tuvok before he becomes Commander Tuvok. And then
Uh-huh.
he's in Enterprise as well as a Suleiman officer in that show. So he has a nice Trek background as well. Again, going all the way back to the original series. So this man
Right.
has been a part of Star Trek since the founding of the show, and
Right.
yeah, great character actor. Yeah, he unfortunately passed away in December of 2013.
Ah,
So just want to give some credit there. Again, his name is Joseph Ruskin. So yeah, his voice is
okay.
very distinctive. That's why I recognized that he had been in other Trek before because of the
Okay.
way that he speaks, and I was just like, I know that voice. So it took a little bit digging it up and looking through there. But yeah, he is yeah,
Okay.
he loves Trek.
Well, I have to say too, I Mary Kay Adams as Grilka. I mean, in the first time we saw her in the House of Quark, she was having to play a character who was, tense. She was having to survive. She's having to fight for her life, basically. But in this one, she's able to be that beautiful Klingon woman. And yeah, I as soon as Worf was like, "Oh my gosh, she's glorious," I was like, "Yeah." I mean, I didn't recognize her as the character we had already met before until it came out
Hmm.
from Dax later. That was the same character, but I could understand Worf's immediate attraction. It's like, yeah, she looks great even under all that Klingon makeup. So
Yeah, it's
yeah.
interesting because it's like they do such a good job with the makeup and stuff and concealing the true person
Hmm.
underneath it. I mean, we've always heard those objections about the Klingons not necessarily being an attractive race, but I think that if you over time and we see them and you kind of can see beyond the prosthesis and everything like that, some of that does shine through. And yeah, Mary Kay Adams would be one of those people who I think that with all that on and all that kind of stuff, it did in just kind of enhance her overall look. So yeah,
Right.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I think they did a great job with her and her look and her overall appeal and so forth. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll say it one more time. The Klingons are the biggest success story, in my opinion, in Star
Oh yeah.
Trek. It's hands down they kill it with how they portray that culture and race. So
And it's so interesting because I mean the Klingons have been a part of Star Trek since its inception as well. And we keep seeing iterations of them. Even now, the newer shows, Strange New Worlds, Discovery, they've both prominently featured Klingons, and
right,
I don't see that diminishing anytime soon. In fact, with Discovery. Now that they've jumped into the 32nd century, I believe it is. I would love to see their representation of Klingons that far into the future. So 1,000-year advanced Klingons, what would they look like? What would they be? So forth and so on. I would love to see that. I don't know if we're going to get to see that, but
right,
I would still love to see what the Klingon Empire has been up to 1,000 years from now, or
right,
1,000 years from then, I should say.
right.
Um, but any final thoughts, anything like that on this particular episode?
Nope. I guess we'll find out more about Dax and Worf going forward.
Yes. That is correct, and I'm looking forward to it. Again, there's so much about season 4 that I really loved, but mainly because it sets us up for season 5 and what we're going to see beyond up to the climax of the show. All of these things are going to be related into it, and I can't wait for us to get into that and get your reactions, of course. Now, as always, I say you can watch all the treks on Paramount Plus, except for Prodigy, which apparently is going to be on Netflix soon. I don't know what that's about, but it'll be the only one that's on Netflix. And it won't be, you can't also watch it on Paramount Plus. It will not be on Paramount Plus. It will just be on Netflix. So I guess
Weird.
I'll have to renew my Netflix subscription to finish watching Prodigy. I don't know. But yeah, so there's that.
And you can watch Suits. I've been watching Suits. It's okay. It's good. Overall, it's good.
Okay.
It's not perfect, but it's overall good. So
Okay. The SAG-AFTRA strike is still in effect. We did talk before about there had been like a deal, and then they walked away from the deal. Apparently, there was another deal that was brokered, which got like some of the writers back, but like the actors aren't back yet. So this is why you will start to see like your talk shows are coming back on. So like if you watched Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. That show is back. A couple of other talk shows, Jimmy Fallon, so forth and so on. They're back. SNL is back. Things like that.
oh
But
my
a lot of
goodness.
the major, well, just saying the ones that I saw in the little news blurb that as well are back. Not necessarily if you watch them or not. But
Right.
yeah, those are the ones that I saw that were back. There's like a host of others, but I didn't really pay attention to that. I just saw mainly that seems like certain writing groups anyway are coming back. The actors themselves are not back yet. So if you're looking for any shows to be coming out anytime soon, not gonna happen. If they weren't already completed and in post production, not gonna happen. This
Nope.
also means that they are still going to be delaying Discovery. Discovery was actually the final season of Discovery was supposed to be out right now, but because of the need they had to do some kind of reshoots and whatever else, and then the strike and everything, it's been pushed and pushed and pushed. So now we're looking at mid 2024. Hopefully that will come out. This seems to also be the case with Strange New Worlds, which they had not begun shooting the next season of yet, and so now it looks like they're not going to be able to do that until also mid whatever of 2024. So looks like we may be a year plus without any new Trek in general. So we'll see.
Okay. All right.
But other than that, guys, as always, you can find us and follow us anywhere you happen to do your social medias. We are back on X, of course. And of course, you can listen to us anywhere you listen to podcasts. I happen to do it on Spotify. So until next week, take care of yourselves.
Thanks, guys.